Right, what we're going to do today is turning, and that is taking off the excess of the pieces that we've thrown to refine it, take away a little bit of the weight. As you see, this is one we did a couple of weeks ago, and it's an okay cylinder, but it's a little bit clunky at the bottom. It has no foot ring on it because you just cut it straight off, and it needs a little bit of refining. So on this mug, you can see it tapers down nicely at the bottom, and I've put a foot ring on it. This helps stabilise it. Also, it takes the weight of the piece, release the pressure a bit more, and if you've got something hot in there, you're not going to have a full hot surface right down on, say, a wooden table. You're dispersing the heat around as well. It also helps to lift the piece, like literally this lifts it off the table slightly, and when you place it down you can see the two of them. This is quite clunky when it hits the table, and this one almost has the appearance of kind of floating above the table slightly. Also, when you come to glaze, you'll find it's easier to pick up the piece and hold when you're glazing. The glaze as well, when it runs down, this can act as a glaze trap, and if you're using very runny glazes, this little barrier here can slow the glaze down so that it doesn't run all the way off your pot and reduces your pot sticking to the kiln shelf. So this is one we did a couple of weeks ago. It should be leather hard when you turn your piece. So it's gone past the point of being malleable, but if you squeezed it really hard, it's still got a very little bit of give. It's not bone dry and it's not brittle. It should be the consistency of cheddar cheese. So it doesn't move when you touch it, but you can still draw your nail through it and make a mark quite easily. Getting to know how leather hard a piece is just with experience, but ask your tutor if you've got any concerns or worries if your piece is too hard or too dry. You will know when you start turning your piece if it's at the right consistency, because the turnings should come off in ribbons. If when you turn your clay is getting all sludged up and caught in the turning tools, it's a little bit too wet. But if you're then turning your piece and it's coming off in powder and flakes, then it's too dry. So it's just getting it to that right state. Before you place your pot down on the wheel, you want to examine it and get to know the inside of your piece, because once you've put the pot down and fixed it, what you don't want to do is have to keep taking the pot off, looking and checking. You want to have a look on the inside of your piece, use your fingers to gauge how far it is in the bottom from when your walls come up, and you can apply that to the bottom. So that's the width of the base of my pot. So placing my fingers on the top, I can see that the inside edge of my pot is round about there. So I'm going to make a rough mark with my finger just as a guide, so I know where I'm going to be starting and finishing my foot ring. Also, you want to think of the depth of your pot. Where is the base of the inside as opposed to where your outside finishes? And I know that my base is about that thick, so I could turn up to round about there. So if you want to make a mark on the outside of your pot, so you know that's how far you can go down before you go through your pot. It's always a worry when you go turning the middle that you're just going to go right through, and then you end up with a plant pot as opposed to a mug. And you will all do this at some point. Happens to every potter at some point. They miscalculate how thick their base is and they end up going right through at the base, which is another reason why you should leave yourself a good amount of clay when you're first putting that finger in when you're throwing your piece. But have a good feel around. Look at the shape of the inside of the piece as well, because the inside of your piece might be slightly different to the profile of the outside of the piece, and you want the thickness of your walls to carry on as evenly as possible all the way around. This helps with the aesthetics of the piece, but also with the weight of the piece, and when it comes to firing, especially at stoneware, if it's thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top, you're going to have more warping and distortion in your rim. So to try and keep it as even as possible, symmetrical as possible, it should be as even in the walls from here all the way down to here. This just takes a little bit of practice. So what you want to do is get your pot nicely centered on the wheel. If you've got a perfectly thrown cylinder or a perfectly circular pot, this is going to be reasonably easy. If your pot has got knocked in the drying cabinet, or it's been moved slightly when you've taken it off the pot, or it's just had a bit of a wobble on it when you're actually throwing it, it's going to be a little bit trickier, but try and get it as centered as possible. Don't spend hours doing this. Get it as close to the center as you can and go with it. But there are ways of telling how centered your pot is. You've got rings on your wheel head. You can use these as a rough guide. Using these won't show you exactly that your pot is centered, but by putting it on and making sure that it's reasonably even from the center, from the rim of your pot to one of the rings. So I'm going to even that up slightly to begin with, and I can see it's about a finger's width either side from here to here. It's even here and it's looking even here. So I could try seeing how centered that is now. This pot has been knocked slightly, so it's a little bit off center, but I'm going to go and try and find a center as good as possible. So using your finger, if you touch your finger on, you can see that this pot is moving ever so slightly. I know it's doing that because there's a slight dint in the side of the piece, which only really shows when the pot's moving. When it's perfectly stationary, you're not really going to notice it unless anybody points it out. But it's when your pot starts moving, you can see there's a slight wobble on it. So I'm going to try and get it so it's moving as little as possible from my finger. So what you can do is take a pin and hold your pin to the side, and you can hear or see that it scratches at some points and moves away from the pin at others. That's because the pot's moving from side to side. You want it to be as perfectly circled with the pin as possible. So you want to move your pot ever so slightly. If your pin is touching here, you want it to move away slightly from there to where it's not touching on the other side. This takes a little bit of playing around with and a little bit of practice, because the actual dynamics of it can be a little bit confusing. But you want your pin to be touching all the way around, and I'm getting closer to a full touch of the pin all the way around, but it still needs to move over this way slightly. Pin on here. This isn't bad, it needs one little touch more. And there's one little area just here where it's not touching, but this is probably because the pot has been knocked and it's slightly off. This is possibly as good as I'm going to get this one. If you want to check to see where your foot ring is going to be, take your pin again and make a circle on the top. If you've turned off and neatened up your pot before you take it off the wheel, this is going to help, because it's going to show where that actual circle was when you took it off the wheel and the circle when you're doing your foot ring is. I know this one needs to move over slightly that way. And get rid of that one again and put the next one in. So I can see that's pretty well aligned. If I start turning now, that's pretty centered on there. So I'm just going to go with it. As I say, don't spend hours doing this, because you can move it this way, move it that way forever. And if it's not perfectly thrown, you're going to find it really difficult to get it perfectly centered. So do the best you can. When you attach the pot to your wheel, you want to take just small pieces of clay. Don't build up great big massive walls of clay all the way around the bottom, because what that does is it restricts your hands when you're moving, and also you can damage the rim of your pot and misshapen it even further. So you just want a little piece of clay, put your hand on the pot, put the clay around the piece, and attach the clay to the wheel head. So you're pressing it down on the wheel head, not against the pot. If you press it against the pot, you'll misshapen the rim. So with your thumb, just squeeze that clay onto the pot. And I'm only going to attach it at 3 points. You don't need to put clay all the way around it. And this is now firmly secured on there. So this is what I'm going to turn with, which are loop-ended turning tools. There's lots of different types. There's very big ones to very small ones. These ones are better for throwing really large pots, and these ones are better for turning very small pots. You'll find which turning tools you prefer. There are some square-ended ones and some rounded-ended ones. You can make a square-ended shape with a round-ended tool, and you can make a round-ended shape with a square-ended tool. It just takes a little bit of practice for using them. I'm going to use this really small one to begin with, just to mark out where I'm going to put my foot ring and where I'm going to start taking away excess clay. So to make the outside of my foot ring, I'm going to have my elbows in again, my hands joined somewhere, possibly at the thumb on my end of my other thumb. My left hand is just going to be cupping the pot. If you're holding your hands this way, you are using this as your hand as an anchor to hold this one steady, and this hand is here to grab the pot just in case it flies off the wheel, which it can do at points. But you want to be looking directly down on top of your pot again and pressing down gently with your turning tool. I'm going to be holding my turning tool a bit like a pen. You can, if you want more stability, put the tool underneath your wrist with your finger on top. That means the tool almost becomes like an extension of your hand, and you can use your turning tool to press down and mark out where you're going to be putting the outside of your foot ring. And you don't want to just press your tool down onto the pot and keep pressing. You want to be releasing it. You'll get a much more even turn of your pot if you're letting it go, and you're not going to make massive mistakes. So press down on your pot and release, down and release. Keep doing that until you started to make a definite inroad into your pot. So you can see here, this bit here is where I've started to make the outside of my foot ring. So I'm going to leave that now and then make the inside. I only want my foot ring to be, as in this one, just like half a centimetre, a few millimetres wide. It doesn't need to be ever so deep. So a few millimetres in from the outside, I'm going to make another line. Tapping down gently, going down just a couple of millimetres. And you can see my clay is coming off in quite nice ribbons. That means it's perfectly leather hard. This is the state it should be for turning. So I'm going to take away the excess on the inside of my foot ring to begin with. So I'm going to take my turning tool slightly at an angle and draw it in towards the pot. So going all the way into the middle and take away any excess. When you take away the clay that's sitting there, don't blow it because it's got silica in it, and that can be a health hazard when it becomes airborne. So make sure you just either have a stiff brush or with your finger move the clay away. Don't blow it up into the air. I've got a larger flat edge tool that I'm going to use at this point to take off a little bit more and to even out the surface of the inside of my foot ring. And I'm using that, dragging it inwards in towards the middle. And my hands at the moment are only attached here, but this hand is acting to steady my right hand, and also it's always here just to grab the pot if it needs to be grabbed at any point. So try and remember how far you can go down. So I know that I had a good 1/2 centimetre to 1 centimetre at the bottom of my pot. So I'm going to go down reasonably far, but I'm not going to push it. Also, I'm going to leave those turning lines in there. It's just a decorative feature. You can make it perfectly smooth and flat if you want to, but having that little spiral on the inside is just a nice decorative touch. So now I'm going to work on the outside profile. You don't really want to turn past 1/3 of the way down the base of the pot. You shouldn't really be turning all the way down to here. Apart from anything, you can make your pot unsteady and unstable, and you can begin to press in the walls at the top. So I'm going to use my turning tool to take it down a little bit further, marking out where that foot ring is. Taking off bits at a time. And I'm going to level off the top of my foot ring too. So that's my foot ring made. So now I'm just going to take away some of the excess clay here. So for that I'm going to use one of my larger turning tools. So I'm going to keep turning, pressing it on, letting it, releasing it, pressing it and releasing it. And I'm going to curve round the side of my pot. So I'm following the profile, but I'm taking away some of the clay as well. So I'm remembering the shape of my pot on the inside. And I'm trying to be as sympathetic as possible to the outside profile as I am to the inside. But you've got to think about the profile of the pot that you want, so you might have to compromise slightly. So there might be a little bit of thickness still left, but ideally you will take away as much as possible. So I'm just using my turning tool just to take away small bits of clay in increments. So I just want to take away the main piece of clay to begin with, and then I can think about if I want to do any decoration on the pot. Take away a little bit more from the inside possibly. Just tidying up the inside of that foot ring. I'm going to make a little decorative feature down the base. So on here I've just got turning lines going down. On this one I'm going to do it slightly different. So I'm going to use my flat-ended tool to make a mark just up here. And then from here I'm going to take the pot in slightly. And this isn't necessary, it's more decorative than anything else. So I'm just taking my tool around the side of the pot. Take away a little bit from underneath my foot ring. Because every piece of clay you take away will help with the weight of your piece. So especially if it's going to be something like a drinking vessel or a teapot or something where you're putting something into it that you're going to be using, by the time you've put liquid into this vessel, it's going to be twice as heavy. So you want to think about the weight of it. So I'm going to put some decorative turning lines in that. So I'm going to use a little ball-ended sgraffito tool. Just to press in some little lines. And these will act as glaze traps. When the glaze is going down, this will slow the glaze going down, so it won't run quite as quickly. And hopefully you should be able to stop it sticking to the shelf. Also the foot ring will act as a natural point where you can wipe back. I'm going to use the back of my nail just to level out and polish up and soften off the surface of this foot ring. You can use a kidney if you like, if you've got nice nails. I haven't got nice nails. And polish that off slightly. Makes a really nice finish to your foot ring. Also using your kidney just to polish up the surface of your piece as well. Just drawing this tool up and down to make a little decorative feature at the top. So, if you've got any little burrs or things, like little bits of damp clay that have come up that are stuck in there and they're not coming out at the moment, leave them till they go bone dry, and then you can get a stiff brush or a toothbrush in there and then just clean them out. If you try taking them out at the moment, you end up smearing them around and they can get really messy. So that's that piece turned. So I'm going to take away the clay very gently at the bottom, because at this point you don't want to damage the rim of your piece. So taking away the clay, just come away, and then your pot comes up really nicely, and you can see that there is decoration up and down the side from where I was moving the turning tool, and the little banding lines as it goes down. So this could be just a beaker or just a pot on its own, but I'm going to attach a handle on the side of this similar to that one, and we'll do handles at another point. Thank you.